Jason, PKI represents a very strong secret, right?
Yeah, it's the apex predator of secrets at this point in time.
So let's suppose we wanted to do that same level of power of a secret, but we wanted to do it offline.
Yeah, because most of the time when we're talking about PKI, we're talking about systems that are very connected.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
And that's why even when we're talking about IoT devices that aren't connected to networks, things like rectification go away and concepts of PKI become difficult.
Yeah.
It can definitely be done. Entropy on the device itself might not be sufficient. So therefore, anything that's offline is sometimes difficult for PKI.
Yes.
But not totally impossible.
Okay.
So let's talk about areas where really weak credentials or no credentials at all are used in offline scenarios where why not introduce PKI instead?
Okay.
And I'm just going to wing it here.
Okay.
Because this might be a bad idea, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway.
Throw it out there.
What happens if a sheet of paper
Okay.
with something printed on it becomes
You mean like text or a glyph? What do you mean?
a QR code?
Okay. Okay.
Something like that?
All right.
A machine readable code.
Yeah, a QR code or glyph.
QR code, probably.
Fair enough.
So therefore, all right, we have two problems, right? We have to imprint the equivalent of the secret within the QR code.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing you absolutely have to avoid is the thing being like photocopied.
Sure.
And so this isn't about perfect. This is the perfect, don't think perfect. I know a lot of people who are listening to this podcast, you guys are all perfectionists and you're like security absolutists.
Except you. We know you're not.
You're not.
Okay.
Yeah, you are too. Yeah, everybody is. Nobody listening to this isn't a perfectionist absolutist.
Okay.
That's the thing we can all be blamed for.
Sure.
But let's just say, Tim, you were all of a sudden in a scenario where infrastructure got obliterated. You know, a hurricane, God knows what.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And all of a sudden guys with ham radios become like the handiest guys in town because they're the only people who can communicate. And you've got to set up a nursing triage.
All right.
And it is incredibly important that nurse A and nurse B and nurse C are the only people who can get through that door. Or at least be, there's a security guard and that person has a computer who can actually beep on the QR code and go, yeah, you're you. Well, in that scenario, like perfection kind of goes out the window. Because if it was perfection, we'd have a hardware token, right? So, the equivalent of a secure element with a PKI secret. And the I am me comes from that, right? That's the ideal.
Okay.
But what happens if nobody's phone is connecting? Like there's nothing to connect to. There is no internet. You do have computers. You do have computers and you do have scanners. But really all you have is how do you issue a brand new secret? Well, the easiest way to, unless you got a bunch of YubiKeys keys like stuck in a drawer somewhere, that would be great. But if you don't have that handy, what do you do? Okay, well, you print the QR code of the secret, right? And I'm not talking about the private key.
Right.
So what you're actually basically use the PKI concepts of, all right, what are you actually doing here? You're authenticating. It's essentially an authentication function. And so therefore, authentication is really a form of signing, as you know, right? Mm-hmm. So therefore, what's the most important thing about this QR code is that it's essentially the public key of the thing that is wanting to do the authentication.
Yep.
But signed. So it is a signed, the signing function on this public key is basically what makes it same thing as an SSL cert.
Okay.
Right? Because what is a CSR? A certificate signing request. A CSR is essentially the subscriber's public key plus some information signed by a CA.
Mm-hmm.
Take that equivalent which is something that can be shared with the world, right? A signed public key. And then essentially what can be done with that? Well, a lot can be done with that.
Yeah. I mean, if you know who you're expecting and you know that you've got to, that this is who you're looking for, the public key can get you there. Now, of course, though, it's a public key.
Yep.
So how do I know this isn't a different nurse pretending to be my nurse?
So the thing is, though, is that each of these nurses in going through the authentication event, right? I think there is something in the idea that a secret that is non-transferable, in other words, their own private keys. The important, this is where the perfectionist idea has to, you got to quell that emotion. So if the system itself has a signed public, it can then be used to generate challenge documents for the private key of that's essentially that the nurses are walking around with on paper. Now you might say to yourself, well, I can photograph that, I can photocopy that. Right. So what's the next thing that's necessary is something that to make the copying of that a bit more difficult.
Which is what?
Which is what? I have found out that there are laminators out there.
Okay.
Now, you might say to me, well, Jay, there's the stretch. Right? The laminator might be like the thing you couldn't do. All right. The laminator, though, for like 3 cents a print, could actually make a laminated version of the private key that actually has micro printing on it.
Okay.
And if you wanted to spend an extra couple cents, you could even put a PUF chip embedded within this, right? I'm starting to get all crazy here.
So you're out counterfeiting this. This is going to wind up being money.
Yeah, it's essentially what's the cheapest form of money that you could print, right? Yeah. And yeah, that private key is not being kept as secret as it should be. This is where you have to quell the perfection. But imagine if you had a hard to copy, especially in a low resource environment, and that private key died every day. In other words, the nurses got a new print the next morning,
right,
or later that afternoon. Short lifespans.
Short lifespans are better.
Right? You built the policy right into the way the paper worked. In other words, the policy against that private key is that it's gone by a certain point in time. Very short lifespans. So in a scenario where you're like up the creek and all you had was paper, even if you didn't have the laminator with the fancy anti-copying things, would that be reasonable?
Well, it would be better than the alternative. So that's point number one, right? You've spelled out this scenario where obviously if we could give them a token,
right,
we'd rather. So we're discussing the scenario where we can't.
Right.
And is it better than just trust me, I should go through this door? Yeah. Is it foolproof? Probably not.
It's definitely not. I guarantee it's not foolproof.
Yeah.
By definition, not foolproof.
Yeah.
And I think the final question is, are shared secrets just better in that scenario? And here's my conclusion. This is where I don't have an answer.
I don't know that they're better. I mean, you might make the argument that they're not worse.
Okay, so this is
but I don't think you're going to say they're better.
This is an all mind experiment, right?
Yeah.
Where I'm not saying to people in the United Nations who deal with this scenario every single day. Yeah. Doctors Without Borders, those kinds of people. Yeah. Like, I'm not saying go do this.
If you're worried about the scenario where somebody is copying the nurse's badge, then surely you need to worry about the scenario where somebody is eavesdropping on the password. How can that be more secure than copying the badge?
And Tim,
if you're copying the nurse's badge, that's individual, right? You know the difference between nurse A and nurse B and nurse C coming through. If we have a password scenario, I mean, I guess you could assign each nurse an individual password, I suppose. So maybe that's equivalent.
Tim, that's where I'm landing.
Yeah.
My point to this little podcast was not, here's what the United Nations should do in triage scenarios.
Oh, we'd have to be in dire straits to do this, but yes.
No.
Go on.
This is merely a mental experiment to say, are shared secrets ever better, even when the PKI is compromised?
Yeah, honestly, I probably haven't given this a lot of thought, but on the top of my head, I go, there's no way that the shared secret is more secure than this.
That's what I wanted you to say.
Like the worst case scenario is they're equally secure.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Yeah.
If I freaking printed a private key on a piece of paper,
it's still at least as good as, and probably better than a shared secret. I agree.
interesting mental experiment, isn't it?
Interesting mental experiment.
That's it, Tim.
All right. Thanks, Jay.